Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Mike Arujo. I'm the Executive Director of the Rhode Island Jobs with Justice. We are a coalition organization of more than 50 faith, labor, and community groups, representing more than 60,000 members in the state of Rhode Island. We are here in strong support of Representative Williams' bill, and I will state the reasons why. Today's a pretty important day in a lot of ways. Among the fact that we're hearing the bill today is also the anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King. And I can't help but notice the contrast in this conversation when we think about a man who literally died working for inclusion, that we're talking about excluding people from society. The point of this bill is to normalize and rationalize a system that is irrational right now. Families are forced into a condition of fear by not knowing whether they're going to come home. Children are not going to school. People are not going to work. This is not helpful. The contribution that immigrants make, undocumented immigrants make to this community has been estimated to be more than $38 million a year, split between 25,000 working people. We're looking at a contribution of nearly $100,000 per person. This is a tremendous economic engine. But besides that, we can set that part aside. And we think about the human argument and the human cost that it takes by having people live in fear. We can't afford to allow people to live outside our margins. We can't afford to have people live on the fringes. And I know that the opposition is passionate and meaningful when they have these reasons. But I believe that the central reason that they have is a fallacy. Our undocumented community, our immigrant community, is among the most stable in the country, most productive in the country, the most integrated in the country, and the most shared. Every part of our society has been affected positively. From Representative Philippy, who has restaurants, I believe, and I'm sure has employed at some point in his life people who had questionable status as far as documentation, to the food we've been served this afternoon. We don't know where it came from, but we know that the people made it, did it, and they did their jobs well, and they cared for us. To prevent their ability to travel freely on our roads that they pay taxes for, as just like we do, is to prevent full inclusion in society and to set up a second tier of living in the state of Rhode Island. When we have attempted to have two separate societies functioning side by side, the end result is never good. To have our 30,000 brothers and sisters, children, grandmothers, and aunts live in an underground society that is not included, not counted, and not factored in, or not even cared for, is to set up a system that apes almost directly a Jim Crow system of the South, one for which Martin Luther King died for. Representative Williams' bill is vital in bringing in our society and closing it up. Opening it up. I can't think of an example that we've had throughout history of the world where a society has flourished that has closed its borders or have been hostile to the visitor. In fact, the founding tenets of Christianity are one of accepting and welcoming the stranger as an equal and as one of our own. Our state itself is founded by a person who came here seeking a better life without documentation, in fact, persecuted in the country they came from. Our founding principle as a lively experiment is one of inclusion, is one that has attempted experiments in freedom and shared society in a way that no other state has dared to do. Representative Williams is taking part in that tradition, and that's why I urge this committee to pass Representative Williams' bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Michael? Representative Philippy.
Hi, Michael. Representative Coughlin asked a really probing and interesting question about a half hour ago, and it's one that I asked Stephen Brown from the ACLU last year.
Yeah, we spoke about that too.
And that concerns whether the state can refuse to comply with a validly issued warrant in federal court from the United States Attorney General or the FBI. Maybe Mr. Brown could correct me, but I seem to remember colloquy last year came to the conclusion that they couldn't resist. There was a validly issued warrant for the data held by the DMV of the 30,000 brothers and sisters you just spoke about, it would provide a location of every single undocumented immigrant throughout the state who has applied for one of these licenses.
You
And-
expressed
hold on, let me finish, please. And I've heard many of the fears expressed by yourself and organizations that you're partnered with about what you see coming out of the federal government, about what you perceive coming out of the federal government. So I'm just having a difficult time reconciling. If we pass this bill, I think it will create a statewide database of undocumented immigrants. I don't believe that the state can refuse to comply with a federal warrant. I disagree with the Mayor Elorza on that point. So my question to you is, do you share the same fears? Do you fear that this will create a statewide database? And if so, why would you encourage members of the undocumented immigrant community to even apply for this license?
Right. I believe we spoke about this last year, and I thought it was an interesting and it's a reasonable argument. There's no two ways about that. I am surprised to hear it coming from Representative Coughlin, who is co-sponsor on a bill that is pretty aggressively anti-immigrant and encourages people to turn neighbors in, but putting that aside. Not every federal law, and I think the term you used when we met was, suppose a psychopath should become president, was literally the word you used.
It was over a year ago.
That was over a year ago. And sitting a year later with hindsight, it's true. The fears that come from the federal government are legitimate and real. And the choices that you brought up about, there is an issue when the governor initially signed the paper at the community meeting that said she supported full equal licenses for all undocumented workers, and she would do that within a year, was for full equality. I have personal misgivings about a second-tier license. I do fear things like having Jim Crow systems, because anytime you have a A for one and a B for another, you are creating a database, but also creating a second class at the same time. However, I think, especially on a day like today, it's good to remember that the process of justice and the process of inclusion, as Martin Luther King said, the arc of justice is long, but it bends towards history. This is a step in that bend. This is a process that brings justice to people who don't have fear. Yes, there is fear of the government. There's no two ways about it. However, that fear can be mitigated if we allow our people to travel more freely. Having people in the shadows, whose neighbors we don't know, whose names we don't, like our neighbors who may be hiding status, is a greater risk. I mean, I know for one that we do have a duty to violate unjust laws. I mean, that was what Martin Luther King did when he sat down at lunch counters. So we do have a choice, and we have a moral choice, but those choices have to be borne by each individual as it comes.
And you would be saying that the duty to violate unjust laws would be a duty on behalf of someone at the DMV to refuse to comply with a lawfully issued federal warrant?
I would be hesitant to recommend any civil servant to violate any federal law. However, I would be strongly in favor of every individual looking to their heart and making a moral choice based on their religious history or their ethical conviction on what's right. Our history books are littered with corpses of people who have stood up to unjust laws and done so have done so as civil servants. I mean, the history of Europe is effectively one of two sides, one being civil servants who resisted and the other side of civil servants who went with it.
So getting back to my original question about whether you would be hesitant to recommend that an undocumented immigrant apply for one of these licenses, given the current state of national politics in your estimation, would you be hesitant to recommend that an undocumented immigrant apply for one of these licenses?
No, I would not be hesitant. I believe the people in the state of Rhode Island will protect its people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's more of a comment, but I have to say this line of questioning that we have regarding the federal government and issuing subpoenas for state records is a bit of a red herring, because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a state function to control our roads, something that the United States Constitution really has no power over. And can I be the first one this week to bring up the 10th Amendment score? And you know, there is an important consideration that's not often talked about, and certainly not really outside lawyer circles, when it comes to the states doing their thing and the feds doing their thing, and it's called comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y. And the federal courts, which would ultimately have to deal with this hypothetical dispute, would take that into consideration. And I don't think it's clear at all that the federal government, in any way, shape, or form, has the power to use the United States court system to force one of the 50 United States, which make up this country, to divulge any record in their system regarding, you know, who holds a driver's license and who doesn't hold a driver's license. It presents a complex tangle of legal issues that, to my knowledge, no legal dispute ever in our country has even sort of gone there because of these comity considerations. So it is hypothetical in the extreme, and I just as much as anyone else, I appreciate sort of playing the what-if game around this. But with regards to this bill, I come right back to it at the end of the day. It is a safety issue for the drivers of Rhode Island and the citizens of Rhode Island, and all this other stuff is just chaff and fluff to shroud the basic argument, I think, of the forces against this bill, which basically they don't like illegal aliens for their reasons, and you know, that's really it. I think everything else is camouflaged and a red herring.
Representative Knight, I think you're correct that the state can issue licenses. I think that's what comity would come down to, that the state can't be prevented from issuing these licenses. I think it's a different analysis whether the documentation behind those licenses is something that the federal government can ask for as part of an investigation. So we disagree on that point.